Hi everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions back to the channel. How are you, Tim?
Good, Peter. It's been a while, so I'm glad to be back on.
Absolutely, good to have you back on the channel. We're going to talk about a band that I haven't actually previously covered on the channel, but I have a soft spot for, and the band is Journey, and I know they're a band that's very close to your heart. So, we are going to pick a Journey album out of their discography and choose one album that we would take to a desert island, explain why, spotlight some songs, and then, maybe just have a bit of a broader chat about Journey per se. So I'll reach over to you, Tim. What was your first encounter with Journey in the day before you tell me about your desert island disc?
Wow. It goes back a long way, but I think I would be correct in saying that the first Journey-related thing I ever heard was "Oh Sherry," which was Steve Perry's big solo hit. I was aware there was a band called Journey, but I started really listening to music around late '84, and Journey hadn't had an album out in almost 2 years at that point. So I realized eventually that I was hearing lots of Journey songs. I just didn't know who they were. Songs like "Don't Stop Believin'" and "Any Way You Want It," and put it all together like, oh, that's the band that sings all those songs. So yeah, go back a long way with that band.
Well, my journey with Journey is exactly the same with you, because Journey could barely get arrested in Australia, Tim. We didn't know anything about them, except there was one outright hit called "Oh Sherry" by Steve Perry in 1984, went top 5. So that was kind of my introduction with Steve Perry. What a great song. And I think Australia fell in love with his vocals, the quirky film clip with Gene Wilder. Everybody loved that song. And then nothing
Yeah.
until a considerable period of time later. There was a show that became a bit of a pop culture sensation with probably our daughters or our children, called Glee. And
Oh
Don't
yeah.
Stop Believing got a second lease of life and started to get played on the radio, and bands started covering it, and it became a bit of a cross-generational, a hit like 20, 30 years later in Australia. I don't know, probably the same thing in America.
Well, the funny thing about that song, it was a number 9 hit in its original life. Was not the highest charting song they had.
Yep.
And it just, over the years, just kind of grew as being a song that, unfortunately, it's now become a song I need to never hear again. I've heard it too much.
Yeah.
Now, I won't. It's a fantastic song, and there's so many things to love about it. Not least of which is the fact that the chorus doesn't even come until the end. They don't beat you over the head with the chorus, but it almost became a cliche. Whenever they'd have like a spoof, a satire kind of movie, and they wanted to have a feel-good moment or something, it just became, it's a great song, and the exposure, it was great for the band, and they continue to tour, and the greatest hits albums continue to sell. But I'm such a big fan of their entire catalog that it kind of overshadowed that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I understand. And
I'm sure they were laughing all the way to the bank, but for a big fan like me, it's like they have other songs. They got a lot of other great songs.
absolutely. And another force of nature that really pushed this song along was the Broadway musical called Rock of Ages. So what we're going to do now, I have no idea what Tim's Desert Island disc is. So I believe there's another show that Tim did wax lyrical about Journey. So I haven't watched that show. I'm completely blind to this. So Tim, if you want to put up your album and I'll put up my album, what your favorite is.
Well, would you
There
look
we,
at that?
there we go.
Great minds are thinking alike.
Spot
Look at
on.
that. Yeah, I did an episode of the Contrarians well, 2 or 3 years ago now, and I picked this as my Contrarian favorite Journey album. Um,
Absolutely.
but I was thinking when you asked me about this, I'm like, well, is a favorite album always necessarily going to be a desert island album? And I don't think it necessarily is. But in this case, I can make a pretty convincing argument why Frontiers would be the one.
Absolutely. It's a banger of an album, top to bottom. Let's get into the songs and maybe do four or five each. And I reckon that we'll have a pretty fair coverage for the viewers as to
Yeah.
why we think this is the best Journey album. So over to you. What's the first song you'd like to spotlight?
Well, the first song I'd like to spotlight is the obvious choice, the best known song from the album, and a song that is getting a little bit more of that, thanks to Stranger Things, is now ascending to that, that magical place of pop culture where everybody knows the song. And that is Separate Ways, Worlds Apart, where they really went to town on the artwork here, just recycling the album art. But it's the opening song. It went to number 8 in its initial release, and to me, it's always been the quintessential Journey song. It's always been one that I've elevated above most others. There's so many things that I love about it. I like the forcefulness of it. I love Steve Smith's drum pattern. It's not your average pop song drum pattern by any stretch of the imagination. Neil Sean soloing, and of course, like Steve Perry. Steve Perry, I find on Frontiers I think it might be his peak as a vocalist. He's got just the right amount of soul and a little bit of edge to his voice that I don't think that this album was a pleasurable experience for the group. They're a fairly contentious group anyway. There was a lot of pressure because this was the follow-up to the Escape album, which is Journey's biggest selling solo studio album, aside from the biggest selling thing they've done aside from the greatest hits. I think it sits at about 6 million copies, Frontiers does, but I think it's the better album. And what I like about it and what I think, well, we'll get into more of the songs, but I think there's two distinct phases, if you will, of this album. But this is a perfect way to start it off. You're starting it off with a rocker, and it also happens to be a top 10 single, a very recognizable song, and still one that, unlike Don't Stop Believin', and I don't want to make it sound like I don't like Don't Stop Believin', it's an all-time classic. I just need to never hear it again, unless I'm listening to the album in full. But you hear it everywhere. But Separate Ways, for some reason, if it comes on the radio, I'm still listening to it. I'm not flipping the channel. I don't get tired of it. So for whatever reason, start off with Separate Ways.
I'll do a counterpoint to that. Well, not a counterpoint because I've chosen that. I think that's top 3 Journey. I love that song. And to me, when I hear that sonically, it takes me back to the 80s. Now, that's not necessarily a criticism. It doesn't sound like 2024. It does sound like an early 80s album, but I like it. I like the sounds. I love that scratchy, urgent guitar line, it sort of drives it along. And then you've got these wonderful melodic key padding of Jonathan Cain. This band is a triple threat. Great singer, great songwriter, Jonathan Cain, and you've got a guitar hero. It's a triple threat. A lot of people think of Journey with their romantic ballads. There's a lot of crunch. This album has a dark heart.
Yes.
When we get deeper into it, a lot of the personnel in this band were going through some dark moments in their personal lives. They were going through divorces, and you look at the lyrics and there's a lot of sort of anger and bitterness talking about toxic relationships. Separate Ways. It's an opening track. Separate way. I mean, That's what I like about this album. I think this has got a little bit of danger, a little bit of edge. It's much more out of the box than other Journey albums, and this is a great song. I just wax lyrical about it. Went to number 8, should have gone higher. Probably the only thing I'll criticise is the goofy
Oh,
video clip where the Jonathan Cain's doing
yeah,
keyboard,
yeah,
air keyboard.
it's a pretty terrible video, and it usually gets singled out as one of the worst. But
Mm,
no, it's a case of these 70s bands. A lot of times, most of them were like, what do we have to do this? Why can't we just make our music and go out on tour? They never wanted to make videos. And it's almost like, okay, so if we're going to make videos, we're going to make the worst videos ever. I mean, even I think that, and this wasn't the only one they did, but I think even in the day it was laughed at. It wasn't one where people liked it at the time and then they look back, and go, that hasn't aged very well. I think even at the time they recognized, this is a little silly. This has really very little to do with the song. They're on a loading dock, and there's this mysterious woman that just keeps walking back and forth, and yeah, it's I would hate for a young person to have that be their exposure to this song rather than just hearing it, because it's a fantastic song. There's a lot to love about it, and you're right. There is, I don't want to say a menace, but you're right. There's a dark heart to this album. That's a good way of putting it. It is there. They were in collectively. They were in kind of a darker place, and I think that tension, instead of ripping the group apart, which it eventually did, because this is still the quintessential Journey lineup. The classic 5-piece Journey lineup. Even though I love Greg Raleigh, I thought he was great. But this is the quintessential 80s Journey, and they were never the same after this, but man, did they ever go on a bang.
absolutely. And the thing I like about Neil Schon's guitar work is he has this trademark type of riff where just before he does the guitar lead break, and actually I call him the king of the outros, because a lot of these guitar lead breaks are right at the end of the song. And we'll talk about that as we go into the more into the show. And he kind of repeats the melody line once or twice and puts a lot of vibrato in it. And then it goes into this arpeggio and he just really rips into it. It's sort of like a trademark. And the guitar work on this song is just classic Neil Schon.
Yeah. And he said that in interviews. He's like, he likes to throw in the fast parts in between just playing the melodies. If you just play slow all the time, it sounds like Muzak or elevator music. And I like the fact that he can play a really nice melodic line and then just wind his way up for another one. I don't think he gets enough credit for being such a great, not just a master of melodies, but he can shred with the best of them. Just an all-around great guitar player. So yeah, and I think it's put, his guitar playing is put to great use here. And you're right, he does it a lot where he'll play off the melody, the vocal melody, but then he'll embellish it a little bit. So once you get the vocal melody down, he'll play with it a little bit.
For sure. All right, I'll pick a song, and I think you'll probably do your take on it, and I'd like to hear on it. Chain Reaction is an absolute cracking song. It's probably between this and Separate Way as my favorite song on the album. It's got this real crunchy chugga guitar line. It's sharp. There's lots of urgency. And Perry, his vocal lines, he sings with so much conviction. The chorus is hooky, and it's kind of hard rock. It's one of their heaviest Journey songs, I'd say. And again, you've got Neil Schon, the king of the outro guitar. It's like right at the end of the song, it's like he hits you in the butt on the way out of the room. It's just a great guitar line. What do you think of this song?
I love it. This has another silly video. I'm guessing that they shot a bunch of them at the same time, but the video to this song is pretty silly. And that's one of the things I like about Frontiers, is it's part of that two-sided thing. Every song on side one has a video. So every song on side one was a focus track for radio. But Chain Reaction, yeah, it's just a driving hard rock song. My only complaint, and I understand that they want something that's radio friendly and sort of the rough edges smoothed over, produced by Mike Stone and Kevin Elson. I mean, they think they produced Escape too. I wish the guitar was a little louder on this song. it's basically an all band thing. But you're right. It's got the down, digga, 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 down. Like I wish the guitars were a little louder. Not on every song, but this song calls for it. And the solo section, it's more of it's like Neil and Jonathan are playing the same melody, guitar and keyboards. But yeah, at the end, they let him rip. And again, I wish that the guitar was louder. And just as that, I wish it would fade out a little longer because he's really getting into like the best licks. It's like we've talked about John Sykes many times. You listen to Valley of the Kings on the first Blue Murder record. I wish they'd let that song go another 3 minutes because it's just getting into some really tasty stuff when it completely fades out. But anyway, yeah, love Chain Reaction. It's always been a favorite. I don't ever remember hearing it on the radio, but it was a mainstream rock hit, and obviously they thought enough of it to shoot a video for it. So
I easily think this band, 1984, if they played Donington and maybe lost a lot of the ballads and just played the rock songs like this, would win the audience over. They would mix it.
Yeah, at that point, now they may have had to go back into the pre-Perry stuff, but yeah, they could put a set list together that's pretty rocking. I mean, really, they dig back into stuff like Where Were You and Line of Fire and La Doo Da. That doesn't sound like a heavy song, but it kind of is. Can Do from Infinity is kind of a heavy one. But yeah, even on Escape, you've got Dead or Alive, Keep on Running. Like, yeah, there's great stuff. And Chain Reaction, I mean, if this was the Frontiers tour, they could have opened the show with it.
Yeah, I could see that they could easily share a stage with like your Saxons and those sort of bands in a Donington festival. This album actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, did hit the top 10 in the UK. So they were making a little bit of traction.
Yeah, it did. They were, I mean, Journey's kind of one of those quintessentially American bands. And I think one of the reasons, too, why they didn't have any impact in Australia is they never toured there. And if you don't tour, even up here in Canada, I mean, we're the next country up. And, Escape was a big record. This was a big record. But they didn't have as many top 10 singles here as they did in the States. And they probably came up and played Montreal and Toronto, maybe Vancouver, but that was it. Until much, much later when they would actually, in 2015, the only time I ever saw them, they did an extensive Canadian tour. But in their album making, hit making days, no, they didn't concentrate that outside of the States.
Well, I guess there was quite a few bands that were sort of very Journey-like. Some that come to mind are like your Loverboy, even Styx. I mean, similar. Styx and this band are kind of similar because both bands had a start as a prog band and then sort of evolved into something much more commercial and AOR, so to speak. But I just think Journey was probably, in my opinion, my humble opinion, they were the leader of the pack because they just had so many hooks.
As far as AOR goes, Journey were kind of like the Led Zeppelin of AOR. And what I mean by that is like no other band in their genre has a diamond selling album like they do with Escape and the Greatest Hits.
Probably Foreigner would be the only one who would have given them bang for their buck in that genre, wouldn't you say?
And they did, but I think that Foreigner's biggest selling album is the Four album from 81. And I think it's like at 6 million. Surprisingly enough, Foreigner, as many big hits as they had, they never had that one album that just everybody bought. Like 6 million is a fantastic amount, but it didn't keep selling over the years. You know what I mean? And they didn't have the greatest hits that kept selling like Journey's greatest hits did. It's pretty amazing. Journey are just that cut above everybody else as far as, songcraft and as far as sales. I mean, they just dwarf most of these bands. Foreigner's probably the next closest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Foreigner sort of did lose a lot of their rock crunch where Mick wanted to go in a much more commercial direction, which was much to the disdain of Lou Gramm, etc. But Journey, I still think, even though they had a lot of balladry, you still had that rock heart, and Neil Schon was definitely pushing
here's
the
the
rock
thing,
crunch.
Here's the thing. all respect to Mick Jones as a songwriter and as a producer. Neil Sean's just a better guitar player. And I think Mick Jones would admit as much. And I think that's one of the main differences.
He's a guitar hero. That's the thing.
Yeah, like Mick Jones, Neil plays for the song. Mick Jones is, play for the song type of player. Neil plays for the song, but he was just naturally gifted and has those Foreigner songs don't have those memorable guitar solos like Journey songs do. They have a few. They're very simple but effective. But yeah, I don't know. There's just a difference, and I think the difference lies in the guitar playing, the guitar player, it's just kind of one of those things, and maybe that's one of the reasons. I don't know. They both had excellent singers, and they both wrote great songs. But yeah, I mean, Foreigner went in almost a no guitar direction, with Agent Provocateur and Inside Information. As far as the radio singles were concerned, Journey singles, even from Raised on Radio, still had some guitar in them. I don't know. It's just a different approach.
Yeah, absolutely. On Agent Provocateur, even the hard rock songs were so processed. Like Tooth and Nail, you could see that it was just, there may have been a hard rock song, but it was just so overproduced and shiny,
Here's the thing, Journey's productions were better too.
Mm.
And they've aged better, I think. They're better on the ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about the Neil Schon and the King of the Outro. I've got a theory that a guitar solo on rock radio doesn't play as well in the middle of the song, but it plays better at the end of the song. So I think it's deliberate that Neil Schon, he wants to shine, he wants to put the guitar hero, but in order not to be obtrusive and go too heavy, he moves his guitar noodling right to the end of the song. So it gives, the people like you and I, like a little bit of rock crunch, something to go, oh, okay, I better listen to another one. What do you think of that theory?
I think that the most profound example of that, and it's pretty amazing that they were able to get away with it, is one album back. Well, it's one of their biggest songs, Who's Crying Now? Just that electric guitar solo at the end. That's the rest of it. There's a little bit of acoustic throughout the song, but it's mostly piano and synth and bass and vocals and drums. But I have never heard a disc jockey cut that song off until that guitar solo's gone through a couple times. It's an accepted part of that song. And I think that he said, hey, this works. I'm gonna keep doing it. Not copying, but just the arrangement. It's an arrangement decision, and it usually works very, very well. And I think Neil, if anybody knows the history of Journey, they didn't want Steve Perry. They liked their progressive fusiony, sound that they had on those first three albums, albeit they weren't selling. And Columbia said, you need to sell records, you need a front man, you need a lead singer. And I think that's how Neil sort of got that shreddy guitar out of his system, is that he worked it in those outro solos and ended up being very good at it.
Well, I can't think of any major bands where the lead guitarist does so many outros, and it's his trademark, but it works so well. I think that's well said. I think you've summed it up. Tim, got another song that you'd like to spotlight?
Well, yeah, it's a sleeper hit for them. It's a song in between the songs we've just talked about, Send Her My Love. This is kind of something that Journey was really, really good at. It's not an out-and-out ballad because it has a pulse to it. It has a higher BPM than, say, something like Open Arms. But it's definitely mid-tempo. It's just a really well-written mid-tempo song, and it's got a good mix of keyboards and guitars, and again, Neil playing a really simple but really effective guitar line, and he does a really nice solo at the end. I think maybe you could look at it cynically and say, well, this was their attempt to follow up Who's Crying Now, but the two songs are very, very different. The only way they would be the same is that they kind of have the same tempo, but that's it. And this song only hit number 23. I think it should have done much better. And I think it's a deeper cut, although it is on that greatest hits. So a lot of people get to, if they listen to the whole thing, they will get to hear it. But I just think that it's a song that of their chart singles needs a little bit more attention, because I think it's exceptionally good. I would never get tired of it because it doesn't have that. It's not obtrusive. It doesn't demand your attention. It's just kind of like, I don't know. It's easy, not easy listening as far as genre, but it's easy to listen to, easy to enjoy. It's not overly long, so it's done. And I think that it provides on the album, I think it provides a nice breather between Separate Ways and Chain Reaction, which are both pretty forceful driving songs for them. And I think it's a reminder of, this is Journey we're listening to here. They haven't lost that melodic knack.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed about that song is the bass is right up in the mix. You know how you're saying, I wish the guitars were pushed up, but Ross's bass is very much in the mix. Somebody on the console has really pushed the dials up on that one.
He doesn't get enough credit either as a bass player. Even if you listen to Don't Stop Believin', he's got those incredible bass licks that anchor the song. I mean, that's he and Steve Smith were such a good rhythm section. They were locked right in, and this is a good example of it. And yeah, I think that probably more than most bands of their genre, they recognize that the bass is not just copying what the guitar is doing. It's not just doing the one note thing. It's very in depth. If you actually listen, we're not talking about Geddy Lee or Chris Squire level, but I think what it tells you is that this is a band with prog roots. So he probably could do that stuff if he had to, if he wanted to. And that's where the second part of the album comes in.
Yeah. Long overdue for a catalog remastering, you think?
Oh, here's the problem, as I see it, Peter. The catalog's been remastered several times, but it's always infinity onward. They never pay any attention to those first three albums. There's never been a North American CD issue of Dream After Dream, which has some incredible material on it. That's like the Forgotten Journey album. And, the only way I'd be very excited about a reissue campaign is if there was a lot of unreleased tracks. But there are tracks from this time period that came out on the box set. Really good songs like Liberty, La Raza del Sol. I guess that's more the Escape era. I don't know. It's they've had lots of remasters, but they're not remastering the way that I would want to see it done.
Some more demo tracks, like workings in the studio, would be nice. But I'm just thinking, like, you compare it to a lot of other bands where they put out box sets per album and a lot more in depth. It seems to be a little bit skimpy, unless I'm missing something, Tim.
Yeah, I don't think Journey have any, what they call those immersive box sets. Probably the only one you'd ever see that done for would be Escape, because that was their biggest selling studio album. That had, 3 big hits off of it. But I know there are more songs that they wrote for this album. I mean, there were 2 songs that were left off this album. One, Only the Young, which became a hit for them 2 years later when it was on the Vision Quest soundtrack. Scandal covered it first, actually, because it was laying there dormant, right? And the other one was one of my all-time favorite Journey songs, Ask the Lonely, which was on the little-known Olivia Newton-John, John Travolta movie Two of a Kind. It was just buried on that soundtrack. I don't even think it was released as a single. I heard it on the greatest hits, and I'm like, where was this song? I don't remember this one. This is awesome. One of my all-time favorite songs of theirs. And so those are recorded for Frontiers, and they were left off, which says a lot about the strength of the songwriting. Like, the record label says, no, don't put those songs on. I don't know whose decision it was. I know Herbie Herbert, their late manager, was always like, he would just shake his head. It's like, how could you leave 2 obvious hits off that album in your hit making peak? But I think they wanted to make a statement with the album. We haven't gotten to side 2 yet, but I think that they did want to make a statement with it. I've never read it said, but there's got to be something, because There's two sides of it, not just two sides of the record, of the cassette or whatever, but there's two completely different faces of this album.
Well, I'll go to side two because I think side two is actually more experimental than side one. Side one is very top heavy with the hits, and that's not a bad thing. So I'm going to go straight in and talk about Frontiers. This is one of their more experimental songs. I love the syncopated rhythms. There's a lot happening, and you've got Neil Schon. His guitar lines are diving in and out, and Perry's vocals are kind of roughed up. That's the thing I like about this album because Perry's tonality is kind of seven different characters throughout this album.
Yeah.
Sweet, rough, sort of husky. He's trying different things, and that's what I like about this song.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about everything you just said because, yeah, I think it is Perry's peak. He's not just doing the crooning thing. He's really singing, forcefully. And oddly enough, so that's the single to Separate Ways, and the title track was the B-side. Now, the version this I have here is the B-side. I have seen versions where the B-side was the song Only Solutions, which ended up on the Tron soundtrack. But yeah, I love the title song. I think it more than anything, it was probably Neil saying, I want to do something. I don't want to do something in, I don't know if it's in 4/4 or not. It doesn't sound like, if it is, it doesn't sound like it is. Very complicated arrangement. Yeah, I like the, it is kind of its time because there were a lot of bands that were sort of singing about technology at the time, almost as much as they were singing about the Cold War. But yeah, it's a really, really cool song. And it's Steve Perry, like, I don't think you hear him. You never heard him like this before, and you never heard him like this again.
It's really roughed up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not that pristine, precise vocal, but it's so good.
Did Perry like the hard rock songs or the ballads?
He's a hard guy to figure out. I think that his voice was naturally suited to more, melodious material, but I think he liked to rock as much as anybody else. It's just that, in so many ways, he was an odd choice for Journey because he wasn't your typical rock singer. He was a crooner. He was a balladeer. He was an R&B guy. I mean, I've heard, many times over the years him talk about what an influence Sam Cooke was on him, and then I hear a Sam Cooke song and the affectations and the inflections and the whoa, whoa, that sort of stuff. I'm like, he got that directly from him. It's not even an influence. Like he sings the way Sam Cooke sang, but it worked. And it's one of the things that, I mean, obviously that's another thing that elevated them is because they had, his nickname was The Voice, right?
Yeah.
So I love the fact that on one of their big 6 million selling albums, they've got these tracks where, it sounds like maybe it was a first thing in the morning vocal. He hadn't been practicing all day. It's like, go. And the imperfections are what make that another thing that make that side. And I'm not saying it's sloppy and out of tune. I'm just saying it's not that exacto Steve Perry perfectionism that you usually get with him.
Yeah, for sure. All right. What's your next song?
All right. So I'm really going to date myself here. But the first time I heard Frontiers was I took it out of my local library. I rented it the way you'd rent a book so I could make a copy of it, right? And the cassette looked just like this. This is an old Canadian cassette. And so I knew, I think I knew all the songs on side one. Then I flip it over to side two, and Edge of the Blade comes on. And I was blown away. I had no idea Journey had a song this tough and this menacing in their arsenal. And it's always been a favorite of mine, and it's always been an argument I've played for people when they say, oh, Journey's a pop band. Oh, all they do are ballads. And it's like, you need to listen to this song. It's a really unique, like Neil guitar riff, in that it's not a riff in terms of it being a bunch of strings. It's all played on one string, I think. But it's got such a cool progression to it, and even Kane's keyboards add a menace to it. Steve Smith's drums are just booming, and there's certain times when you hear Ross Valerie, he's not doing anything overly complicated on bass, but you can just hear him playing really hard. And then Perry's vocal is raspy, and it's an angry song. I'm pretty sure that this was a song about one of the band members' divorces. You know, contracts and lawyers, champagne downtown. I'm pretty sure that this was directed at an ex of some sort. And just the way that Steve, Steve says, if it's sharp, if it cuts, enjoy yourself. Like, you don't get that from Steve Perry a lot. And then after that, Neil just starts ripping. This is not an outro. He doesn't save the ripping for the outro. He rips in this main solo section and in the outro.
Yes.
It's a powerful song, and it immediately announces that, okay, we gave you the hits. Now we're going deep, and that's all this side two is. It's deep cuts. They're more experimental. They're heavier. They're just very, very cool songs that I would have. It just makes me wonder what would have happened had Journey reconvened and put a new album out in late '84 or early '85, more like this. But it was the solo projects that did that. And, Neil gets the blame for that, because he did those two albums with Jan Hammer. Then he did the album with Sammy Hagar, the HSAS album. And Herbie Herbert is quoted on the Behind the Music as saying, "You keep doing these." And he, meaning Steve Perry, is going to do a solo album. It'll probably be commercial. It'll probably do very well. And you will rue the day that you started deviating from the band. And it's true. They were never the same after 1980. They were never the same. So this is that side of Journey that I would have liked to have heard more of. I would love to have heard a whole album of this type of stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Well, this is one of the darkest songs on the album. It's very much a divorce song. The lyrics are very bitter. Sort of, you want trouble. It just sums it up. So it's definitely a Poison pen letter. Great song, heavy riffage, and that wonderful outro solo. Hey, I want to just read an excerpt from a Rolling Stone magazine, which always were supportive of the band. I'm being sarcastic here. They gave a 2-star review in the day, and just a paragraph, it goes, "It's hard to say what Journey is up to on Frontiers. With several of the group's members complaining to the press last year about how success had locked Journey into formula music, it seemed as if the band was signaling a shift to a less overtly commercial, more musically demanding sound. But as much as the sound on Frontiers has shifted, it's hard to believe that Journey thought there was any risk involved. Indeed, in some ways, this is the band's most conservative effort yet." How can they get it so wrong? I don't think it's conservative in any shape or form.
Well, that's about as complimentary as you were likely to get from Rolling Stone back then. It's like a backhanded compliment. So they at least recognized they were doing something a little bit differently. Yeah, it's not a carbon copy of Escape, because Escape, there were singles scattered on both sides of the album, and generally everything on there, except maybe Dead or Alive, was, well, maybe Mother Father, but that's very melodic and ballad-like. But pretty much everything on there was very up-tempo, very positive, whereas this is not. This is the we toured relentlessly, we haven't slept, we all got divorced, we're angry, but we have to put an album out, so they channel it, right? No, I don't think it's conservative at all. The only thing conservative about it is that the fact that they seem to make a decision. Well, we're going to put all the hits. We're going to make the album top heavy with the hits. But I like the fact that they left side two to kind of do what they wanted. And that's what I hear when I hear this. I hear this is for Journey. This is them in their purest, fists clenched kind of state. And like I said, it's the only time you hear it. Really, the only time you hear it is on side two of Frontiers. You start to hear the chain reaction. That's like a teaser.
I've got to talk about Faithfully. That is probably the uber power ballad of all uber power ballads. In fact, Tim, I think they had a few polls on Classic Rock magazine of naming the top 100 power ballads of all time, and this was either number one or number two. And I'm sure that Bon Jovi and bands of that type were sort of listening to this particular song. What do you think of Faithfully?
I think it's so much better than Open Arms. I've never been a fan of Open Arms. It's I agree with what John Waite told Jonathan Cain. It's too schmaltzy. I appreciate the fact that it sold a lot of records for them, but not far from their best. And Faithfully didn't even hit the top 10, which is really crazy. It peaked at number 12. I think it's one of the ultimate power ballads. It's probably the definitive one of the 80s. It's Neil Schon knowing exactly when to play and when not to play. It's a tour de force for Steve Perry. He sings it really well. Jonathan Cain wrote it himself. I think it was a pretty heartfelt lyric. And I mean, I don't think you need to look any further as far as it being influencing artists than Prince admitted that the outro of Purple Rain is the exact same chords as the outro of Faithfully, to the point where apparently he called John Cain and said, look, I'm sorry, I didn't and he's, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And I never noticed that for years until it started to come up. I'd see it in print. I go, it is the same chord progression. Yeah. But yeah, it's a fantastic ballad. It's totally deserving of its hit status. Again, the fact that it wasn't a top 10 hit, I bet you most people would tell you it was. They'd say, oh, that must have been a top 10 hit. You'd think, wouldn't you? I don't know what kept it from. It must have been really, really tense competition that week in Billboard. I don't know what else was in the chart, but yeah. And Steve Smith's drumming. I mean, Steve Smith, just those big doom, 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 those big tom fills. I mean, that's a big part of the reason why Bryan Adams got him to play on a little song called Heaven from the Reckless album, which became his first #1 song. He had opened for Journey on this Frontiers tour, but he wanted that Steve Smith flavor, and that's why he plays drums on the studio version of Heaven. So, but one of the things as a huge fan that I like the most about it is that it leads to, if you're listening to the CD and you don't have to flip anything over, leads right into Edge of the Blade.
I think it's a monster power ballad. It's like riding a tsunami. It's just a wave of emotion. And, a lot of detractors may think it's kind of schmaltzy, but I think Cain is sincere. He's talking about his faith, and Perry interprets it well. Now, my biggest criticism with a lot of AOR is a lot of the lyrics are very trite and cheesy. But I think that if you've got a singer that interprets it and believes in it and sells it to the audience, then that's good enough for me. And to me, I think this is a very sincere, heartfelt, and genuine song, and it deserved to be a monster hit.
Yeah, I think so. It's Journey's lyrics, they're not Shakespeare, but they're not. This thought was put into them. And but I think you're right. A lot of it is the way that Perry sells it.
You sell it. He sells it. And it bleeds. I think this band has got more credibility over time. I think this is the sort of music, Tim, they don't make anymore. You don't hear it on the radio.
Yeah. I think once the dust cleared, The cream rises to the top, right? And it's the same when, we talk about the hair metal bands. Well, there's just a handful of those bands that can still go out on the road and attract people. It's because they had several hits, they had several songs that people loved. They didn't have just one or two. And Journey were not just another band. I mean, they were lumped in with a lot of bands, but a lot of those bands went by the wayside, whereas Journey just continued to go from strength to strength. I mean, the fact that it's a strange idea because, I mean, after Raised on Radio and the tour, Steve Perry basically said, I'm done. And they kind of just disappeared. They kind of went away. They all went and did something else or did other things. That Greatest Hits album quietly comes out in late 1988 and just goes on to be an evergreen seller. Like it will never, you'll go to any Walmart and there it is. Like, and it's been reissued several times, been reissued on vinyl. People want to hear, and they love those. It's not just for one song. There's a good dozen songs that everybody knows. So not every band has that in their back pocket. And I think that it's good to see that hard work pays off. And even the Rolling Stones and the hip magazines and music editors of the 80s were forced to sit back and go, you know what, maybe there is something here. Maybe there is some substance to this. Because why has it impacted people's lives? Why does it continue to get new generations interested? There's got to be something there.
Well, you just don't hear this sort of music anymore. It's unique. It's melodic rock is really, it's kind of a niche genre of music. I know it's out there. It's big in Europe, but this sort of music it's kind of like jazz. It's niche now.
Yeah.
So
Where it is kind of hard to believe. This used to be mainstream music. This used to be considered extremely commercial.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think it'd be remiss. I've said the word remiss a few times in this show, but we've got to talk about the personal relationships of the band. What a mess. So, for a band that has the appearance of being all very united and, moving in the right direction, but behind the scenes, they've been a kind of a red hot mess, haven't they? There's all these different personality clashes. Tim, do you want to just talk about that to the viewers?
Absolutely. And the best way I can do it, I got to give a shout out to Nick DeRiso from Ultimate Classic Rock. I had him on Tim's Final Confessions quite a few episodes ago to talk about this book, Journey Worlds Apart. I highly recommend this book to any diehard Journey fan. This goes in so deep to the band's career and magazine articles from the day mixed with modern interviews talking about the same time period. These guys were as dysfunctional as any band you can name. It's just that it was very quiet. It was very, it wasn't really, they put the appearance up of all smiles on stage, but yeah, these guys did not get along. Steve Perry, most people would tell you he was extremely difficult to work with back then. And ended up calling a lot of shots, especially once he had a successful solo album. That's why Ross Valory and Steve Smith were let go during the making of Raised on Radio. Now, what would the drummer and the bass player, why would they pose such a big threat? Doesn't make any sense, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's quite a mess. And there's financial stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I kind of knew, but there's some things that I really didn't know. It's basically these guys, when they started, when the original Journey got together, it was formed out of the ashes of, the original Santana band. So it was Greg Raleigh and Neil Schon. And they got Ross Valory, who had played with a bunch of people. He played with Steve Miller. He played with, I think, there's another name that's escaping me, but they got him. But even from the beginning, Ainsley Dunbar was very difficult to work with, they say. And he only lasted one album with Perry. Then they got Steve Smith. Always top-notch musicians in this band, but personalities, I'm surprised they made as much music as they did. But they, at least for a while, were able to see, the greater good.
Man, more dysfunctional than the Ramones. I'm surprised that some of these guys even spoke on stage. I would imagine separate limos, separate hotel floors.
Well, and
Just
unfortunately,
basically, they just see each other on stage.
yeah, that never changed. I mean, Neil Sean and Jonathan Cain. I mean, at one point, I thought for sure, well, why don't we just have a pay-per-view cage match and let these two duke it out and be done with it? But, um, but if that's what was driving the music on side two of Frontiers, then they made something positive out of a negative, because I hear so much creativity, but also tension, but it doesn't get in the way of the enjoyment of the music. I think the only reason that I hear tension on side two is because it's so out of character for what you would think this band would be. You know what I mean? Like, you could almost template a whole other band with side two of Frontiers. There's no real ballads on it. You might call Troubled Child a ballad, but it's very dark. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how these guys that can't get along make great music together. I don't really know what it is. And then other bands that, they're best of friends and get along, they get to a point where they just can't write good songs anymore. I don't know what the difference is. And I don't know. It's just difference in personalities, I guess.
Well, they've become a little bit tabloid for my taste because, it pops up in my feed. Another lawsuit. Even
Yep.
their current singer, Arnell, comes out and says that I may not be singing for them, and Neil Sean wants me out. It's just a red hot mess. So you think that there's a bit of stability with the later lineups or records? No, absolutely not. It's worse.
It is. You'd hope that by the time they get to be the age they are, that they would cut this nonsense out and realize that there's a legacy of great music that people want to hear. It's one of the drawbacks of the internet. It could be the exact same situation in 1983. Neil Sean and Jonathan Cain might have hated each other, but you didn't know it. You didn't need to know it.
Well,
And I went through a period, Peter, where I did not listen to Journey. I couldn't stand hearing about them, and it poisoned me to their music. And it wasn't until they finally put a new studio album a couple of years ago, which took forever, which is not bad. It's a pretty good record, but I always listen to it with that backstory in my head of, I wonder, this may have never come out for them just being petty and at each other's throats. I don't understand it.
Well, out of great adversity comes great art, and they've certainly put out some great songs. After many, many years of not touring Australia, they did a co-headlining tour of Australia with Deep Purple, and to be quite frank, they blew Deep Purple off stage, and this is a Deep Purple fan. So Arnell...
that is quite a statement, folks, coming from Peter.
Yeah. Arnell is a great facsimile of Steve Perry, and
Arnell's fantastic. Yeah.
And seeing Cain and Sean on stage, that ticked the box for me. So
yeah. I saw them I've seen them once. I saw them in 2015 when they undertook that extensive Canadian tour. Now, this was a unique situation because this was that period where Dean Castronovo had some personal issues that became legal issues. And so he was not doing that tour. Omar Hakim played the drums on that tour. He was fantastic, of course, but it was Ross Valerie on bass, and it was John Cain, Neil Sean, and Arnell sounds great on stage. And if you look at the old footage, Arnell moves around on stage way more than Steve Perry ever did. Steve Perry didn't need to be that, David Lee Roth type frontman because he had that voice. But, as far as entertaining a crowd, Arnell's fantastic at it. And he's got that great voice,
he's got a great set of pipes.
I hope that they, don't ruin it, by touring too much, because that's what happened to Steve O'Jerry. They just toured too much, right? You need to keep touring to make the money, but when you're singing a catalog was recorded, back when Steve Perry was at his peak and he could hit all those not just hit all the high notes, but sing songs in these high keys, it's tough to keep doing it. He
Yeah.
himself doesn't. I mean, every once in a while he'll say, "I might go on tour." I think that's just clickbait. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Folks, I wouldn't hold my breath for a reunion with Steve Perry. Like every couple of articles, there's some sort of angle and, will he come back? I think it's gone. So just let it be. And I think they're on separate journeys, so to
I
speak.
think the classic, the closest you'll get to that, and you should be happy with it, is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. And there was a little bit of, you know, feel good vibes there with Steve Perry, giving a pretty good speech, and the pictures of him and Arnell, that was pretty cool. Yeah, I'd leave it at that.
Well, if it wasn't going to happen on that night, it's not going to happen subsequent. That's all I
Not
got to
happening.
say.
Yeah.
Tim, fantastic to have you on. Great to have you back on the channel, and we finally talk about Journey. I think we've given this album a fair spotlight. So, folks, do yourself a favor. Listen to this album. It's got a lot of rock crunch. If you think Journey is just schmaltzy and just corporate, wrong. This album's dark. It's crunchy. It's got a lot of hard rock smarts. So, Tim's put out a book, another book from Y&T, and it's a book focusing on Kansas. So over to you, Tim. Tell us a bit about this book.
Yeah, we go from J to K now. We're going in alphabetical order. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, this has only been out as we film this for a few days. Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. And this is a similar setup to my Y&T book. Go through the 15 studio albums. I've got different panelists on each one. A lot of familiar faces to folks that watch the channel. A lot of familiar faces. I mean, we got John the Music Nut, we got Grant Arthur, we got Daniel Bosch, John Clauser, on and on and on and on. It's available through Amazon, as all my books are now, and it's doing quite well. And if you're, again, it's for the diehard fans, but it's also for the very casual fans to maybe dig in a little bit deeper to this band. And, Carry On Wayward Son is great. Dust in the Wind is great. They've got a lot more to offer. And I say the same thing about Journey, as big as Journey are. And you think you know who they are, check out the first 3 albums. You get an album like Frontiers and listen to it from start to finish. So yeah, I'm all about catalogs, right? And listen to all of it if you can. But yeah, book is out now, and really happy with how it turned out. So yeah, check it out.
I'll put the link below. So when Tim shares this show, and I'll share Tim's link, please support it. It's a fantastic book. Also, the Y&T book, which is still ticking over from time to time. We did a show on Y&T, which was a bit of a deep dive, and also those interviews that you did with the Y&T, the bass player and the drummer. That was great.
Yeah, John Nyman and Aaron Lee, they were super guys, and
Wow.
they were happy to talk about their solo releases, but they were happy to talk about Y&T as well, and yeah, that was really cool. Still waiting to nail that Dave Menicati interview, but yeah, that was quite a moment. And yeah, the Y&T book keeps selling. It's not selling like it was when it first came out, but it's the nice thing about having them on Amazon is that they're still available. Selling a copy of Unspooled once in a while too. So,
Absolutely.
And speaking of Unspooled, here's the Frontiers 8-track. I figure if you're going to go to a desert island, you don't know what kind of equipment they're going to have there, so you better bring it all. Now, I will say this one totally destroys the track listing. So there's no neat side 1, side 2. It gets out of hand very quickly. So there you go.
All right, Tim, thank you very much. Tell us what your favorite Journey album is, what your favorite songs. What do you think of this album, Frontiers? As I said, I didn't know what Tim was picking, and we picked the same album, so that's just perfect synergy for this show. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation, and you'll see me and Tim talking more in 2024 on the channel. Check you later.